Hello, my name is Wesley Fryer, and I am the Director of Technology and Education Outreach for the Oklahoma Heritage Association, and I'm also the co-director of our statewide Celebrate Oklahoma Voices digital storytelling project, which has been ongoing for about 2 years now. And I'm pleased today to be able to share with you a presentation that was given at the Safe and Healthy Schools Conference in Oklahoma City on November the 10th of 2008. The title of this presentation is Internet Safety, Social Networking, and the Oklahoma School Security Act. But I'll actually be talking less about the Oklahoma School Security Act because when I originally presented this, I was co-presenting with a lawyer for one of our Oklahoma administrative support organizations, and that was really the focus that she took. But what I'd like to do is talk not only about the issues facing us with cyberbullying and social networking and trying to put that in a realistic frame, not necessarily a documentary 60 minutes hyperbole frame, but I want to talk real specifically about things that we can be doing in our schools, in our homes, and in our communities now to address these things. Because as I'll talk about, social networking is not going away, the internet is not going away, and honestly there are a lot of exciting possibilities for how these tools are being used and can be used constructively to support learning. I'd like to begin by citing some research, and the company McAfee, which is one of the best-known antivirus companies out there today, published this report which was titled, McAfee Research Reveals Mothers Rate Cyber Dangers as High as Drunk Driving or Experimenting with Drugs. And the key findings were that 58% of moms think the government's not doing enough to keep kids safe online, 32% of teens clear the browser history to hide what they do online from their parents, and 34% of teen girls have given out photos or physical descriptions of themselves to strangers. This is a quotation from the study, and it found 63% of teens say they know how to hide what they do online from their parents. 43% have closed or minimized the browser at the sound of a parental step. 32% have cleared the browser history when they finish using the computer. 16% have created private email addresses or social networking profiles. And 11% have unlocked, disabled parental filtering controls. In our Oklahoma schools today, as you may be aware, we have a severe level of content filtering happening. In fact, about a little over a year ago, in September of 2007, when I was in Shanghai, China, for a conference presentation, I did a little test. And yes, indeed, behind the Great Firewall of China, where we have, we think, severe censorship, we have greater openness and greater access to many websites than we have today in our Oklahoma schools. It's my contention that we need to help students learn to become the filter. And this image of these pumpkins, I think, kind of illustrates this idea of cyberbullying and cyber threat. We have a perception, which is not entirely accurate, that as soon as students open up the web browser to a MySpace account or open up an instant messaging or video conferencing program like Skype, suddenly predators are leaping right out of the screen to attack them. And in fact, when we compare the actual statistics of what's happening with social networking and cyber predators, we find that there's a real mismatch between the fear, which in many cases has been driven by the media, perhaps well-intentioned, but perhaps not. And we need to bring those things in line. So today I'm going to cover 3 main points. I'm going to make 3 contentions, which all relate to the concept of digital citizenship. We talk a lot about citizenship in schools, but today we're not just citizens of our local community, citizens of our state, and citizens of the nation. We are literally, by being online, citizens of a global interconnected network of individuals, and we need to understand both our rights and responsibilities as digital citizens. I'm secondly going to share some additional research that relates to social networking, which I think is very important for school administrators, for teachers, for counselors, for parents, a variety of educational stakeholders to understand. And finally, I'm going to talk about some proactive approaches that we can do. Last night, today is January the 14th, 2009, doesn't really matter to you at this point, but we just had last night across the state of Oklahoma a big event called Crystal Darkness, which was focusing on the menace posed by methamphetamine. And just like in that particular instance, it's not enough to just become aware of an issue. We need practical things that we can do to address these issues, recognizing realities that are around us. And so that's what I want to really focus on in the end. I do want to mention that I call the Oklahoma Heritage Association home today, and the Gaylord Pickens Museum, which is in downtown Oklahoma City, opened its doors about 2 years ago, but the Heritage Association has been around for 81 years. And when we talk about proactive approaches to addressing the dangers of social networking and being online and internet safety, one of the best ways to do that is to provide a sandbox and an area in which students can practice with adult moderation and supervision social networking. And so one of the things that we're doing with the Celebrate Oklahoma Voices project, of which the Oklahoma Heritage Association is a partner, is providing that kind of website and environment. So we provided educator workshops for the last 2 years that have now become known as Celebrate Oklahoma Voices. And these are focused on providing a digital backpack of equipment to teachers, which includes a digital camera, a mobile audio recorder, a headset with a microphone, and a flash drive, showing teachers how to create digital stories so they can then help students share those stories. And then those can be in an interactive, yes, online social network that we can rate and give comments and feedback, and then also utilize those videos which are being created. So I want to also mention at the outset, this is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Only license, which is a big way of saying you can take this presentation, as far as I'm concerned, and really share it with as many folks as you want. Just give attribution, and I'd also ask that you give attribution to the Oklahoma Technical Assistance Center, OTAC, which is making this particular webcast possible. Let's begin with 3 contentions about digital citizenship. My first contention that I've already mentioned is that social networking is here to stay. And we just, of course, went through a big campaign here in the United States. We're recording this in early 2009. We're about to inaugurate a new president who, I think it's fair to say, to an unprecedented degree, utilized digital tools to connect constituents and potential voters to support a goal, which was to become elected as the President of the United States. So on the screen you see one of the videos that was posted by the Obama-Biden campaign, and the number of views of this particular video, which was grabbed in November of last year prior to the election, was 1,614,474. Now, you may or may not, probably not, watching this, remember fireside chats with Roosevelt and the time at which, America gathered around the radio to listen to our president. Those days have gone, but a new day has dawned where there are even greater potentials for individuals to communicate their message out with not just a national radio listening audience, but with an international global audience. So recognizing that, let's also talk about headlines you don't want in your school. Because the thing we probably hear the most of when it comes to social networking and internet safety are those negative headlines. And the headlines that we've seen here in Oklahoma may only begin to scratch the surface of what we can potentially see with students and others making bad choices with technology. Here is an article from October 2006 called "Principal Sues Students and Parents Over MySpace Page." And this article tells the story of a few students in Texas who decided to make a spoof page about one of their teachers that was very derogatory and very pejorative, and it was horrible. And so there was actually a lawsuit that was filed by the teacher against these students, leading to a real ugly situation. Students have been engaged in destructive behaviors forever, and technology tools can be used in good or bad ways, right? I talk about a shovel. You can use a shovel to, dig a ditch. You can use it to kill a snake or hurt your friend. I mean, it's a tool. We don't want to undervalue the power of a digital tool like a laptop, but at the same time we need to recognize that essentially the tool is pretty neutral, and it's how we choose to use the tool that's so important. And that's why educating students as well as parents as well as teachers, all of the constituents in education about how to use these tools is important. Because could this happen at your school tomorrow? Absolutely. Could a student decide to set up an anonymous email account and create a Facebook account or a MySpace or whatever page and write whatever they wanted and post pictures? Yes, they could. That is a headline you don't want, yet it's something that could happen tomorrow. And whatever you say or do in terms of your curriculum that relates to technology is not going to stop students from having the kind of access that they need outside the classroom and outside the school to do that. Here's another article, and this is from April of 2007 from USA Today. The headline is, "Court, MySpace postings are free speech." And this also involves a student posting information on a social networking site. The student's name is abbreviated AB to protect their identity. But they were criticizing the school principal and some school policies, and I'll read from the court decision. This is coming from a 3-judge panel that was in Indianapolis. It says, "While we have little regard for AB's use of vulgar epithets, we conclude that her overall message constitutes political speech," Judge Patricia Riley wrote in the 10-page opinion. So this is an important issue to recognize as far as student free speech rights. And the Tinker case, if you've taken school law, and I've taken a little bit, I'm not a lawyer, but the Tinker case really established this precedent that the student's right to free speech does not end at the schoolhouse gate. There are limits to what students are able to do, and they basically they are not allowed to disrupt the educational process and the learning process. But particularly when students are going to critique school policy or they're going to critique a public official, there are free speech rights that students have. We cannot, in our Oklahoma schools, lower the mallet and say, "You have no rights to say, anything, and we're gonna hammer you at school for things that you do off campus." This is a huge and important issue to recognize, because we have some districts in our state basically coercing parents to sign an acceptable use agreement, to say in order to use the computers at school, you have to sign this, and that acceptable use agreement says anything you do online, no matter where it is punishable at school. And so these are really important issues, but overreaching these, we need to recognize the fact that as school officials, we do not have complete authority to be able to essentially censor student speech in all cases. Here's another article. This is from eSchool News in October of 2008, and the title of this one is, "Schools Grapple with Teachers' Facebook Use. As online social networks explode in popularity, administrators wonder, is it okay for teachers to quote-unquote befriend their students online?" An important issue. I am not going to advocate that you start using Facebook or MySpace as the learning management system for your class. That's really not an appropriate environment. There are a lot of other, even free environments like Moodle that can be utilized, and many of our Oklahoma schools, Howe Public Schools, Crescent Public Schools, are really embracing those kinds of learning environments. But what are we doing, again, outside of hours? A lot of this, I think, comes down to the same way as a teacher. We would interact with a student that we saw, at a mall or at a restaurant or somewhere after classes out. The lines blur to a degree with online social networks, but we need to be talking about these issues, and I believe that we need to have social media use guidelines for our schools. In fact, I'll be presenting on this at the National Computing Conference this summer in Washington, D.C., and if any of you watching this are interested in developing those and seeing what other schools have done, IBM did this a number of years ago, and it goes beyond just the acceptable use policy you have now. What are the guidelines for using social media? Students have Facebook accounts. Some teachers have them too. And when the two meet, what should the guidelines be? We hope that teachers as well as students are going to make good decisions, but we know there's a lot of folks out there and they're making all kinds of choices, and I believe it's part of our responsibility as educational leaders to help provide guidelines and to help catalyze conversations about these issues. Here's a slide that gives you an actual breakdown of that comparison I told you about earlier, comparing websites blocked in communist China, literally behind the Great Firewall of China, versus one of our Oklahoma City metro schools. And this comparison was done in December of 2007. So comparing Wikipedia, WordPress.com blogs, PBWiki, which is a wiki site that's used by many educators to share curriculum, the website Flickr, which is a photo sharing site, Technorati, which is a site that's used as a search engine for blog content, Yahoo Mail. Many of our districts block, outside mail. In part, that's because of a misunderstanding about what the law actually requires in terms of archival. Sometimes it's just again, that control issue. Let's stop all external email from happening inside our district. Blogger.com sites, Proxify, which is a site that can be used to bypass filters, Google Notebook, Google Documents. The bottom line were for this comparison, 5 of these were blocked in China, and 9 of these sites were blocked in the Oklahoma school district. And so that truly is representative. I served from 2006 to 2008 as the AT&T education advocate here in Oklahoma, working with teachers and students in grades kindergarten through college about technology integration issues. And we do have a lot of filtering going on. So what is the solution? Do we ban it all? Do we try to just shut down the entire internet and quit? Well, I don't think so. I think that would be a very poor choice. And I think that would be a choice that would relegate our school district or our organization to digital irrelevancy. Because we are living in a digital age, and we are living in a time really of, I think, unprecedented change. And what you see in this photograph, the laptop computer, this is, in my view, the future of education. We are wasting money today purchasing $70 textbooks that aren't going to be renewed for 5 years. We need to be embracing digital curriculum, and we need to be putting in the hands of our students tools that are going to allow them to have relevant skills not only today, but in the future as they move into our workforce. This is a big part of what Creative Oklahoma and the Oklahoma Creativity Project is focused on. So, moving to my second main point, we must move beyond the fear factor and become proactive in our approaches to internet safety and social networking. This is a picture of someone surfing, and being from the Midwest, growing up in Kansas and living in Texas and Oklahoma basically my whole life, I am not a surfer, all right? But having visited with people who are surfers, and having visited Hawaii in particular, the folks that I've met in Hawaii, they all teach their kids how to swim, okay? It's an island nation. It would be pretty stupid to not empower your student, your child, with the ability to swim, recognizing that, hey, you're going to go to the beach from time to time. That tide out there can be dangerous. How do you make good decisions about when to swim and when not to swim? And do you have those skills? I really see online social networking and internet safety in a similar way. That we have to help students learn how to swim. This is a photograph of my car with that student driver image behind there. And we kind of steer clear a little bit, or we're just a little bit more aware of that person in the next lane when we see it. Think about your own experiences helping a child learn to drive. Probably not the best experience of your parenting life. Probably a traumatic time, right? Why did you do that? Why did you help your child learn to drive? Why am I going to help my 3 children learn to drive? It's because it's an important skill. And in the same way, being safe, being appropriate online is a critical skill for the 21st century. And this photograph isn't of my own children, but I put it up here because this past summer, my 5-year-old saw a dramatic transformation in her swimming. We started the summer with her not even wanting to come close to the edge of the water, being so fearful of the water. And that's where a lot of us are when it comes to the online environments today and the internet. By the end of the summer, she was jumping off the lowboard by herself without a life jacket. Now, how did this happen in the space of 3 months? Well, it happened because we got in the water together and we got wet together. She had on a life jacket when she initially started. She took lessons. And we were very intentional about working on her swimming skills. And in the same way, we need to do this in the online environment. I have this photograph of pencils here because I heard Alan Kay say a number of years ago that the predominant technology in the classroom defines the predominant learning task. And what is the predominant technology in most of our classrooms today? It's the pencil. It's the textbook. Not so in Crescent Public Schools, right? Every high school student in Crescent in September received their own laptop. One of only about 4 districts in over 500 public districts in Oklahoma to have a laptop initiative. And as far as I'm aware, the only one currently letting students take those laptops home. That's one of the reasons we need to change this too. Where do students tend to have the most access to technology? It's at home. Where do you have the least influence over students? When they're outside your classroom. So this begs the issue or the question of how are we going to empower students to become the filter and to make good choices. We're going to have to change the tools that we have. So my third main contention here at the beginning is the conversation really is not just internet safety. It's about digital citizenship. Because internet safety tends to connotate an idea of just don't. And while there are things to avoid, when you talk to students, there's a lot more savvy with students today when it comes to many online networks and proper behavior than there are even with the adults. We have a lot of fear as adults that kids don't know what to do. It's important to talk to them about that and ask them different questions. The conversation needs to extend to digital citizenship because we're not just talking about things to not do. We're also wanting to talk about things to do. You know, in scouting we talk about citizenship and rights having two sides. You've got rights and you have responsibilities. Voting is both, right? I have a right to vote, but I have a responsibility to vote as a citizen of this nation and this state. And so in the same way, I've got rights and responsibilities when it comes to the digital environment. This photograph of students with cell phones is important because do a survey tomorrow of your students if you're teaching and it's a semester right now. How many of them have cell phones in their pocket? I mean, this phone that I have right now is an iPhone, fancy phone, right? It's a computer, yes. But you know, the processor in every one of our cell phones today is more powerful than the computers NASA had in the late 60s and early 1970s when we landed on the moon. It is incredible. And we are going to reach and are rapidly approaching a situation of one-to-one technology access with mobile devices much sooner than we are with laptop devices. So when I worked with AT&T for 2 years, AT&T was in the middle of a huge transition and still is from a sort of copper line, phone company to a data services company. And the whole vision of AT&T changed. This was the new vision statement they released in October of 2007. And it was to connect people with their world everywhere they live and work and do it better than anyone else. And I throw this on the screen not to just give a plug for AT&T, but to challenge us to think about what our vision and mission statement is in our schools. And I would contend that to a greater degree than ever, we need to see part of our role as the teacher in the room being a connector, helping connect our students not only to the content which we would have tightly kind of controlled and moderated that's in the textbook and in our curriculum guide, but also to content that is on the web. George Siemens talks about connectivism and the fact that so much knowledge and information today resides out on the internet, and then also connecting students to each other. And that's what we're talking about here today. How can we do that safely? There's so much fear. There's so much hype over the predator danger. What are the real facts and how can we help students connect? So that's what I'd like to talk about now, and it's navigating risks. This is a photograph of a compass, and if we think about navigation in historical terms, certainly the advent of compasses was huge, and the ability to use a compass is still an important skill if you end up going into the backcountry. But how do we navigate the internet? How do we figure out what our compass is today? Well, Google is a huge way that we navigate the internet. And I have on this slide, my name goes here in the Google search window. When is the last time you Googled yourself as an individual, as a human being? Each one of us should be Googling ourselves and Googling our children, as well as Googling our students and Googling our schools. You can set up a Google alert, right? This is free to do. It can send a text message to you or an email to you if you prefer email, whenever a certain phrase is mentioned. As a parent, would you like to know when there's something in the news or something on the web that's been published about your child? Can you do that? How much does that cost? Well, it's free. The point is, we need to be assertively taking control of our online identity. Because when we look at how employers now are evaluating prospective employees, applicants, even how sports teams, we had a situation at OU here in the last year with a football player who had created some videos in his home state before he moved here to Oklahoma that caused a big blow up. Look, we need to be aware of our online presence and our online identity, and I believe we need to take proactive control over that rather than just letting the wind control that. It's not the wind, it's things that are being published by others. We need to be publishing things and sharing things so that when our name is Googled, we have actually put some of those links that they're going to show up on that front page. So this is a screenshot of a Google search just for my first and last name. 267,000 hits, right? And, you know, the top, well, every one of those, I guess, this shows 6 hits. All of those are sites that I've created. All of those are sites that I have intentionally published, which represent me and represent my ideas. And my contention here is, let's, number one, become aware of how important it is to Google ourselves and our students. And number two, let's figure out how to take control over what others see when they search for us online. This is a website called allofme.com, and it says, timeline yourself. Automatically create a personal timeline of your life from any digital assets you have, such as pictures, videos, blogs, documents, or internet page. Now, when you Google yourself today, if you're an Oklahoma teacher, I don't know, I'm not sure what you're going to see. If you have a student who's in college and you Google that person, it's more likely that there's going to be a bunch of stuff out there. Why? Because students tend to be publishing and sharing more things online, and students will tag photographs and other things that they publish about themselves and their friends to a greater degree. So this website's kind of an eye-opener, because beyond just Googling yourself, this takes websites like Facebook, like Twitter, like YouTube, and basically time and date stamps those for when those things have been published, and shows really what your online identity is. So anyway, it's free to use. The website is called All of Me. Here's another headline that we probably don't want to hear or see about, but this was from October the 23rd, 2008, from the website and blog Read Write Web, and the title is "Students Competing for Slots at Elite Colleges Resorting to Facebook Sabotage." So what this is saying is that some students, in order to get into the college, are bringing to the attention of the college admissions folks, oh, by the way, did you see this drinking, party picture of so-and-so? Did you know that so-and-so had published this, maliciously pointing to these kinds of things that are out there. So we know that students are not fully developed cognitively when they're in high school, right? There's a part of the male brain, particularly I think, that's part of executive function that doesn't fully develop until like early 20s. And so we wonder, why are they making these choices? But that's not an excuse. We can't just excuse it all to say, oh, those are kids. We need to help kids become more future-oriented and recognize that there are implications for the decisions and choices that they make today, and in terms of setting goals for themselves and thinking about their future, hopefully we can help them change their behavior today by showing them what the potential, both negatively and positively can be. Here's probably the main point of my session today, and that is that conversations are the key. We have got to be in conversation with each other at multiple points. This was a key that came out of the Crystal Darkness documentary yesterday as well, talking about substance abuse prevention. The conversation can be initiated by a variety of people. That can be the teacher, it can also be the parent, but it can also just be the mentor or the friend or someone who's at church or in a sports team, the coach. Conversations are key to be talking about these issues because these things change quickly. And especially as we get into talking about cyberbullying and some of the malicious things that students can do and have done to each other using digital tools, it can change like that. And the conversation needs to be ongoing, and students need to know where to turn. Teachers need to know where to turn. When a situation like this comes up, what's our plan? What are our support mechanisms that we have in place to try and assist folks so they are not alone in facing these kind of things? So those were my 3 contentions relating to digital citizenship. What I'd like to now do briefly is share a bit more research. And are you on Facebook? You can't virtually raise your hand. If we were doing this as a live webcast, we might have a text message vote or an online poll, so I can't see what your response is. But more and more people are on Facebook today. And this is a screenshot of my Facebook status updates for folks that I have friended on Facebook. The Pew Research Center for People in the Press released a report in October of 2008. Again, I mentioned campaigns. It talked about the Democrats versus versus Republicans in terms of donations and activism, and how much in the last campaign, in November of 2008, we saw the election, how much social networking played into that, from emails, from family and friends, from political groups, how many people were watching candidate speeches online, how many were watching interviews and debates, campaign commercials, or any video, How many of them were reading campaign blogs, visiting candidate websites, getting information from social networking sites, visiting any websites and blogs? In December of 2007, that was compared to October of 2008. Based on their study of registered voters, 59% were reporting in October of 2008 that they were being influenced and utilizing social media. That's about 2/3 of the electorate. The impact here is huge, and I think we need to not have our head in the sand in education, and we need to recognize these are things that we can't ignore, but they're also things that we can embrace. And how do we do that? I mentioned earlier the McAfee study from October of 2008 about mothers rating cyber danger as higher than drunk driving and experimenting with drugs. And at the Safe and Healthy Schools conference in November, we had a wonderful series of presentations from Nancy Willard, who is the author of the cyberbullying.org website. And Nancy points out this big disconnect between the fear factor over cyberbullying and the reality of what is happening with actual predation. There is not, to Nancy's knowledge, nor to mine, an example of a student simply being online and then becoming the victim of a bullying attack, and not just a bullying attack, of a predator, without a lot of things happening in between. One of Nancy's main points is that the students at risk online tend to be the same students at risk in our face-to-face world. Students that are isolated, students that are alone, they're not connected, in clubs, in sports teams, with other kinds of groups. The students who are alone tend to fall alone, and we have got to support them. So I want to point you to another piece of research, and a good way to find this, of course, is Google. And this comes to us from the National School Board Association. Their acronym is NSBA, and so the name of the report is the Creating and Connecting Report. So if you simply Google NSBA Creating and Connecting, you'll find this report, which the full title is Creating and Connecting Research Guidelines on Online, Social, and Educational Networking. And this report, which was done by Grunwald and Associates, tried to identify the popular social networking activities for students. And of all the ones you see on this graph, the one in green, about a third of the way down, is updating personal websites or online profiles. And this study, if I'm not mistaken, was from 2007. I don't know what the research pool was. I would assume this is going to be probably 2005, 2006. So we're even beyond this today in 2009. But at that time, a quarter of the students surveyed on a daily basis, oh, I guess not, this is weekly, sorry, on a weekly basis, we're updating a website or a profile page. Let's ask that question to our teachers today. On a weekly basis, how often are you updating a website or a personal page? Well, the number's higher than ever. There are probably a lot more teachers in your building today that are on Facebook than there were 2 years ago, right? There might not have been any on there 2 years ago. The point is, these tools are being used, and they're being used at an increasing rate. This is a news article from the UCLA newsroom saying bullying of teenagers online is common, and that's true also. Do a survey of students at your school and in your classroom. How many of them have been involved to some degree in bullying, whether they are the bully or they are the victim and the target of bullying? Why is it becoming more common? Hello, it's because these are in everyone's pocket. And again, a tool can be used for good or for evil, and text messages can have a perceived degree of anonymity that may be greater than just talking to someone face to face. And so a lot of very cruel things are happening right now with text messaging. This is an article from eSchool News from October the 10th, 2008, and this is talking about the Protecting Children in the 21st Century Act, which requires schools receiving E-rate funds to teach students about appropriate behavior on social networking, chat room sites, as well as the dangers of cyberbullying. So we may have mandates from the government saying you have got to teach this. And I know the last thing we need in our classrooms are more mandates. But whether it is mandated or not, the reality is we've got to be talking about this. Because whose responsibility is it? We've got to get beyond this finger-pointing thing and say it's everyone's responsibility. It's not just the parents. It's not just, the churches. It is not just the schools. It's all of our responsibility. So that's a little bit of research, and I guess actually I need to add one additional thing. The Grunwald research pointed to really my thesis for this presentation which is going to be my last point, proactive approaches. It said schools are not embracing the potential that exists with social networking technologies to help students have more time on task, to help them engage beyond the boundaries of the bell with the topics that we're having them study in school. And really, if we limit ourselves just to that, 45-minute or 55-minute, however much time you have in your class with students, if that's what we're limiting our students to in terms of their opportunity to engage with content and with their learning, we're robbing them, because they live 24 hours a day just like we do. And the opportunity that is pointed out by that creating and connecting research is certainly there for students to connect, yes, with their devices, with their mobile phones, with their laptops, with their computers, to a greater degree than we are today. So let's talk about proactive strategies. And the first one I want to address is differentiated content filtering. And that sounds like a fancy word. But differentiated means you have choices. And today, most of our Oklahoma schools trust teachers online just as little as they trust kindergartners. This is wrong. We trust teachers much more as professionals, as certified professionals, to do things like send notes home, meet with parents. I mean, the principal's not there every single time, the teacher says a word to parents. There's all kinds of ways that we trust teachers. I mean, we trust them alone with a room of children, right? That's huge trust. So differentiated content filtering means we set up a different set of rules for teachers when they're online than students. At a real basic level, this can mean we allow teachers to access websites like YouTube, yes, and perhaps restrict student access to that. Now, I actually think we need to have much more open access for students, and we need to have accountability. So if students are going places that they shouldn't, there's accountability for that, and there's discipline involved for messing up, just like there is in the face-to-face world. Sometimes we freak out about consequences. Oh my gosh, how are we going to handle this situation that came up with pornography on this computer? Well, if the student brought pornography to school, how would that be handled? A lot of times there are going to be correlates to, we handled it this way when it was, atomic, paper-based. Here's how we can handle it with technology. But we also shouldn't overreact, right? Are we going to give a student a consequence? You can never touch a pencil again, ever. You're never getting paper again, baby. That's ridiculous, all right? But we have schools that will do that with technology and say, you're not going to get on the computer anymore all year. I've talked to teachers where that is a consequence in their district here in Oklahoma. That's wrong. So one of the steps forward is to trust teachers online more than we trust students, and that's differentiated content filtering. This picture shows a teacher with rope tied around her and the kids throwing paper airplanes, and that's how we feel sometimes, right? Where our hands are tied. We need to not just turn off the filter, right? That is not what you're hearing me say. Comply with SEPA. Comply with E-rate. We are required in our schools to have content filtering. What you're hearing me say, I hope, is that we need to trust teachers more, and we need to recognize that we live in the United States. We do not live in a totalitarian nation, praise God, that is communist and has, these huge restrictions on free speech. The networks that we have in our schools should reflect that reality. And I know there's a tremendous tension between freedom and control in our schools, but this is a step forward, right? And my question and challenge to you is, if your school right now is not trusting teachers more than students are trusted online, then do what it takes through the PTA, through some kind of grassroots movement, get that changed. Because technically speaking, Tulsa Public Schools is the largest district in our state which does that, which has a different set of filtering rules. We've got other school districts that are doing that, but it's really just a handful. So find out how to get that changed and get that changed. Second point, educational social networking guidelines, or just educational networking guidelines. The term social networking has a bad connotation and a bad rap in some contexts because we think of it just as MySpace or just as YouTube. The honest truth is there are wonderful connections happening right now. Look at OTAC and this webcast. The opportunity for teachers to get professional development and to connect with content and each other online is phenomenal. In fact, I think we're modeling best practice here in Oklahoma with the set of webinars that OTAC is publishing. And every teacher can benefit from this, right? You don't have to be in Oklahoma. But we need some guidelines when it comes to the interaction. And so what I'm showing on the screen here, I know you can't read that probably, but it's a screenshot of IBM's social computing guidelines. And I mentioned that this summer I'll be presenting on this in cooperation with Karen Montgomery, who's an educator friend of mine in St. Louis. Our contention is that every school needs to have some guidelines for social networking, for educational networking, and those go for teachers as well as for students. Some of these things are going to be common sense kind of things, but if we don't make this explicit, we're making assumptions that people are going to know, and obviously, people are making bad choices. We're seeing those headlines. People are also making a lot of good choices that we don't see. How do we catalyze these conversations within our schools? Well, by having some social computing guidelines or some educational networking guidelines, that's one way to do that. As an example, this indicates talking about a disclaimer. This was item number 4 on IBM's. If you publish content to any website outside of IBM and it has something to do with work you do or subjects associated with IBM, use a disclaimer such as this. The postings on this site are my own and don't necessarily represent IBM's positions, strategies, or opinions. Organizations tend to respond to criticism relatively poorly, right? And as teachers, we need to be very sensitive to this fact. Yes, there are teacher contracts, but the last thing anyone wants is to have something they posted on their Facebook or on their blog, really come back to bite them. So as a school, we ought to say, what do we want to do about this? Do we want to shut it all down? We have districts in our state, ladies and gentlemen, and I won't mention their names, which ban any teacher from having a personal blog. Okay? I think there's questions about the free speech rights and the legal authority of the district to be able to do that, but it's happening. I believe our district should, rather than respond that way, say, wow, there's a lot of positive that can happen from this, but we need to help teachers navigate this. It could be wonderful for people to see the great stuff happening in our school district, in our classroom. But at the same time, we need to respect student confidentiality and privacy. We need to be careful when we post pictures and when we post videos. We need to make sure that we have the permission forms in place from parents and from students when we publish student work. And we need to basically be involved in the conversation about these issues. The last proactive solution I'll suggest is to provide safe, moderated places to practice digital citizenship. So I've talked about this conversation being more than internet safety. It's about digital citizenship. Where do you do it? Too often we are just leaving the kids out on their own. Hey, you're gone from school. Good luck. Be safe. Where can they practice? Where are adults involved in seeing what they're doing and helping them say, this probably wasn't a good choice for you to post this photograph and such and such. At a basic level, right, kids need to have a protected profile when they're minors, and that's a mouse click that they can do on MySpace or Facebook. But the reality is, even if something is in a protected space, anyone who's on that friend list can see it and can publish it outside. So anything that's published online, we should treat as if it's on the front page of the Daily Oklahoman or the Tulsa World, right? That's not necessarily happening, but it could. And we do have examples where things that are being published are being brought out into the light of mainstream media. This is a blog called the EdJurist blog. It's EdJurist, EDJURIST.com. And it is a team blog by school law professors, as well as other experts on educational law. And this particular post deals with the e-discovery amendments and electronic technologies in school, specifically email and local documents. You very well could be teaching in a school district which bans all outside email, okay, Yahoo Mail, Google Mail, anything like that. This particular opinion sheds some light on the fact that school districts are not required by law to do that and to archive every single packet that is transversing their network. In other words, having a good faith effort to archive your official school mail is required by the law, and we've got a lot of districts that aren't doing that yet. But it is not required that we shut it all down. We've got to block every social networking site because we got to archive everything. Don't worry, Google's archiving everything. They're taking care of that. In all seriousness, we have got some mandates that we need to take care of in school, but those shouldn't be misinterpreted. And this is being used right now by some IT people as well as administrators to say, no, we can't allow access to any of those networks because we can't archive them or because we can't have absolute control over that. Let me read this from Scott Bowerleys. He says, school district personnel have mistakenly concluded that the adoption of the e-discovery amendments made it a requirement that all school districts now archive every single bit of electronic data passing through their systems. And later in this he says, I repeat my statement from my initial post that the FRCP, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, do not independently require the archiving of anything prior to litigation or the reasonable expectation of it. So that's why it was fun at Safe and Healthy Schools to present on this with a lawyer, right? Because if we take the most conservative path that we possibly could take, we would turn the internet off in our schools. We would take away the computers, we would put the kids at their desk with their pencil and their paper, and we would force them to, in silence, work independently. To not talk to anyone, to certainly not get online, and to really, never publish anything at all because, oh my gosh, they might misspell a word, and then everyone's going to think bad of our school district, right? Or they're going to do something worse. Web 2.0 sites are permissible under the law, and they, in my view, and the view of many others, should be embraced by schools. There's opportunities here. And the number one opportunity, and this is what I'm going to kind of wrap up with, is our statewide initiative called Celebrate Oklahoma Voices. In fact, we'll be recording another webcast here to be shared on OTAC that specifically talks about the Celebrate Oklahoma Voices project. And this website of learners, which, as I record this in January of 2009, has about 240 teachers and students in it. It's not too huge. We have 143, 145 videos that we've created. In the next year, if you look at growth curves of social networking sites and some of these things, we're probably poised to have a lot of growth in the next year. And so we are setting this up in such a way and spending about $20,000 of an AT&T grant to create a new website where teachers will have parent accounts over their students, and they will be able to moderate as well as view the content and the things that their students are publishing and producing. Right now, we moderate all the videos that are published on this site. So of the 145 videos that are there, you can rest assured that educators in the team that administers this project have looked at those videos. And if someone submits something, which they could if they're part of the learning community, that's not appropriate, it would not be approved. That kind of moderation is happening now on the SchoolTube site. You may have heard of TeacherTube, just kind of like YouTube. SchoolTube moderates everything. It doesn't go up there until it's approved. So I want to point you to this project because not only, in my view, should every teacher become digital video certified, which means being able to create a video that we share online in a safe way and being able to help students do that, we need a place where we can do social networking in our schools, and we also know that we can get content that we can bring into our classroom. In addition to the Celebrate Oklahoma Voices, I'll just mention the K-12 online conference. This conference started in October of 2006, and each year 41 different presentations have been published asynchronously for a global audience. We estimate in the 2007 conference we had over 120,000 different sites by IP address that access that, so somewhere around 100,000 folks from around the world who are participating in the conference. And this conference is likely going to continue to evolve and change, just like the internet does, but it's available at k12onlineconference.org, and like OTAC, it is a different professional development model. It is a model where it's self-serve. You come and take in the presentation, but then K-12 Online also puts a synchronous conference together with that so that we have an opportunity to meet live with presenters, and we have dialogue and conversation on the blog as well as other tools about what's being presented. And what's being presented is what I've talked about today, how, to a degree, there's a lot of topics. How can we use Web 2.0 tools to engage students, to do that safely, and to advance the goals of teaching and learning which we have? So global collaboration is here. For my closing frame, I'm going to reference the Tough Choices or Tough Times report, which is the report of the new Commission on the Skills of the American Workforce that you can find on the website skillscommission.org. And this graph is in the executive summary, and it's a profile of successful U.S. firms in the future. You'll see that there are three sides or aspects to this pyramid: routine work done by people, routine work done by machines, and creative work at the top. And increasingly in the United States, our economy is going to be based on the creative work that is done by individuals in research, in development, in design, in marketing and sales, in working with the global supply chain. If you have read Tom Friedman's book, The World is Flat, or if you've gone to Walmart, right? Walmart is doing what it's doing because of supply chaining and because of the global supply chain. We're not, folks, going to beat India and China on wages, and we shouldn't try and engage them in a race to the bottom. What we should do is recognize that our landscape has changed. We need to get creative here in Oklahoma, and that's what the Oklahoma Creativity Project is about. Web 2.0 sites are desirable. The pencil needs to be replaced by the laptop as the predominant technology in our classrooms. OLPC, the EXO laptop of MIT, is doing this worldwide. We need to do this here in Oklahoma through netbooks or through other laptops. We need to embrace these learning potentials. So here's my quotation from Alan Kay to conclude the presentation. And he said, famously, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. But he also said, most people try to predict the future by preventing it. And so my encouragement to us is to choose the right side of that statement and to not be in this context in that I'm trying to prevent the future side. We're trying to invent the future together. So thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any feedback or comments, you can always find me by Googling me, which my name is Wes Fryer, and you can find my contact form if you'd like to share feedback, or if you'd like to provide that to OTAC, I'm sure they'll be able to forward that on to me as well.